Hello, everyone. Today, the stars are already whispering. You just can't hear them yet. Not quite, but they know your name. They knew it before your mother did, before she even felt the fluttering inside her belly, before your father nervously handed over offerings at the ziggurat, asking the gods for a son who might one day do more than sell grain in the market. Tonight, we're going back, not just in time, but into a world where heaven and earth spoke to each other constantly, like old friends trading secrets. And you were born to listen in. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time is it. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Dim the lights. Let the noise of the day settle behind you like dust in a quiet courtyard. You're not here anymore. You're in Babylon, not as a visitor, but as someone meant to belong. You were not born into greatness. No golden cradle, no embroidered linens, just the warmth of a clay home with smoke curling from its domed roof. Your mother's hands always smelling faintly of cumin and ash. Your father's sandals worn at the edges from years of walking the same sun-hardened paths. But something was different about your birth. People said so. Neighbors, priests, even your aunt with the loud laugh who believed in nothing. The night you arrived, the sky did something strange. A flicker, a shift, a movement among the stars that didn't follow the usual script. The temple astrologers noted it, marking clay tablets with swift practice strokes. And though your parents knew nothing of omens, they told the story often. How you didn't cry at first, only opened your eyes and stared, directly at the torchlight, unblinking. It was like he already knew, your mother would say, half laughing, half worried, whenever anyone asked. You grew fast, not taller than others, not stronger, but quieter, more still. You watched the sky more than the games. You asked questions no one liked answering, and once, when your uncle's sheep got sick, you touched the animal's side, murmured nonsense, and it stood up, bleating once, then walking away as if nothing had happened. That's when they called the priest. In Babylon, the sky was not decorative. It was a ledger, a scripture, a thing alive. To live beneath it was to live under constant surveillance, not from kings or soldiers, but from the gods themselves. Shamash, Sin, Ishtar. They didn't merely exist. They broadcasted, beamed their will down through stars and clouds and winds. The moon was no silent rock. It was Sin's eye, and he watched closely. So when a child acted strangely beneath a strange sky, the temple noticed. They didn't come in robes and chants, just two men with rings carved with star symbols, their eyes lined with coal to cut the glare of the sun. They didn't smile much. They asked your father questions, asked you to repeat nonsense syllables, asked your mother about the timing of your birth, about her dreams before labor, about any animals she'd seen the night before. You remember them saying something about Shuilu, the mark of the divine. You didn't understand it then. Only that, after that day, things changed. Your mornings weren't yours anymore. You woke before dawn, walked with a man who smelled of parchment and oil, and sat cross-legged in a room that never felt warm, even in summer. The temple school was not cruel, but it was patient in a way that could feel cruel to a child. You copied symbols into clay again and again, cuneiform signs etched with a reed stylus, over and over until your fingers cramped and your eyes crossed. You memorized hymns in Sumerian, a language no one spoke anymore, just because it was the tongue the gods preferred. You were told not to ask why, only how. But sometimes, at night, your tutor would let you climb the stairs of the ziggurat with him, up past the scent of incense, past the muttered prayers and the rustle of priestly garments, up until the city spread below you like a child's game board, and the sky curved above like a bowl turned upside down. There, he would point, slowly, deliberately. That is Jupiter. See how it moves. It tells us of kings, of battles, of power. Another night, Venus, Beautiful, yes, but it also signals famine. Sometimes. He always said sometimes. Nothing was ever certain. The stars spoke, but they never shouted. They hinted. You listened. You learned to read more than signs. You learned to read pauses, silences, the space between omens. Because in Babylon, the space between meant more than the sign itself. You were still young when the first real test came. A nobleman's wife had fallen ill. Her body burned like the kiln fires of Uruk, and no balm cooled her. The doctors shrugged, muttered about spirits, threw salt in corners. The nobleman, desperate, came to the temple. And your master, with a calm too smooth to trust, said, "Let the boy see." You? You had only watched, never led, never read a liver, never cast stones, never dared to interpret. But that night they gave you a lamb, warm, shivering, innocent. The sacrifice was done silently, efficiently, and when the priest cut open the animal, he stepped aside. Let you look. Inside was more than flesh. It was a map, a landscape of valleys and ridges, of glistening signs waiting to be named. You hesitated, the smell thick, the silence unbearable. But something inside clicked, a knowing. You pointed. The left lobe has a cleft, you said, voice steadier than you felt. The signs are bad. But if she's moved to the northern side of the house and cedar is burned, the spirits will leave. No one spoke. Then the priest nodded. 3 days later, the nobleman returned, red-eyed, laughing. She had lived. From that moment, you were no longer a student, not quite a priest either, but something in between, an adivino, a reader, a bridge. You stopped playing. Children in the alley stopped calling your name. Adults whispered instead. When they saw you coming, they stepped aside, not out of reverence, but out of fear. People feared what you saw, what you might say, because in Babylon, nothing was truly mundane. A cracked brick might be a warning. A sudden cough could signal doom. A lizard crawling left instead of right. A prophecy, maybe. You began to walk more slowly, speak more carefully, because even your silence became a message. There were nights you wished to be ordinary again, to chase frogs in the canals, to shout, to sweat without interpreting its meaning. But those wishes faded when you saw the temple lights flicker in the dusk, when you smelled the frankincense curling like spirits through the corridor, when the sky opened above and whispered only to you. You were never alone, not really. The heavens watched, always. The gods didn't sleep, and neither, often, did you. The sun hasn't risen yet, but Babylon is already stirring. Not in a rush, not with noise, but with a breath. A long, warm exhale of stone, clay, and incense. The kind of breath a city takes when it knows it's being watched by more than just the eyes of men. You step out of the temple's inner courtyard barefoot, as always. The tiled stone still holding a hint of night's coolness beneath your soles. The sky above is fading from ink to ash, and even now, before the light breaks, there's movement. A soft cooing of doves nesting on ledges, a creak of wooden carts starting their slow day. Someone is already sweeping dust from a threshold, even though more dust will follow. This is your home, not just the temple, the city, Babylon, where nothing is ever only what it seems. Every wall speaks. Every gate has a god. There's a rhythm here, ancient and smooth, like the path of a star crossing the firmament. Even in silence, the city hums. You hear it in the rustling of linen robes, the distant splash of water from the canal, the hollow echo of a priest's footsteps 2 courtyards away. Babylon doesn't shout its power. It murmurs. It leans close, like a confidant in candlelight. And always, there are the symbols. You can't walk more than 10 paces without meeting the gaze of something sacred. Not human, not entirely. A lion carved into a stone arch, its face stylized, mouth open in mid-roar. A winged bull guarding a doorway. a clay cylinder embedded in a wall, covered in cuneiform spirals, spelling blessings or warnings, sometimes both. Overhead, banners flutter lazily in the breeze. Deep indigo, saffron gold, the colours of gods and kings. Some bear the emblem of Marduk, a dragon serpent twisting in flame. Others show the star of Ishtar, gleaming 8-pointed and precise. Each symbol not just decoration, but declaration. You live in a city where the divine is baked into the bricks. The smells of Babylon are thick, layered, and constant. They stay with you, even in dreams. There's the sweetness of date syrup warming on an open hearth, the sharp bite of fermented fish paste in the market stalls, the steady curl of incense from temple altars. On feast days, the air turns dense with roasting lamb, honey cakes, crushed herbs underfoot. But beneath it all, always, there is clay. Wet clay, baked clay. Clay shaped, molded, fired, broken, and reused. The scent of earth transformed. You sometimes wonder if your lungs have memorized it. And sound. Sound is never far. There is the metallic ring of bronze bells swaying from a donkey's harness, the watery lilt of Akkadians sung in lullabies from open windows, the flat slap of sandals on stone, and, on certain mornings, the chanting from distant rooftops, measured, melodic, a prayer to Sin or Shamash, drifting like smoke toward the heavens. You pass through the Ishtar Gate, massive, inescapable, covered in gleaming blue-glazed bricks that catch the morning light like a river of sapphire. Lions and dragons march in endless procession along its face, symbols of power and protection. You've walked this way many times, but the gate never stops watching you. It is not merely an entrance, it's a threshold between the ordinary and the divine. Beyond it, the city opens. Streets curve like river branches, rarely straight, always pulsing. Vendors call softly from shaded stalls, fabrics from Elam, lapis from beyond the mountains, bowls carved with constellations. Children dash between legs and carts, their laughter rising above the rustle of commerce. There are dogs, thin, clever, quiet, who know exactly where to beg. And always, in the corners of your vision, there are scribes. They sit cross-legged on mats, surrounded by tablets, styluses, and ink pots. Their eyes flick up only briefly as you pass. You are not one of them. Their world is memory, yours is interpretation. Still, you respect them. They hold the words of kings. You hold the whispers of gods. The ziggurat rises like a mountain of order in the city's gentle chaos. It is not just tall, it is monumental, layered, each terrace stacked carefully upon the next, each level closer to the sky, closer to where the gods are said to walk. At the very top, they say, the air feels different, thinner, cleaner, like the breath of the divine. You've only been to the upper platform twice. Once as a child, when your tutor showed you the constellations from the priest's observatory, and once last year, during the festival of the Akitu, when the king himself climbed the stairs and offered a prayer. You were among those who watched, not as a subject, but as a reader. Your eyes weren't on the king. They were on the sky above him, watching for signs. Nothing unusual happened, and that too was a message. Beneath the great structures, there are smaller truths. Mud brick homes leaning slightly under the weight of time. Courtyards where old women grind herbs with stone. Doorways marked with protective charms. A palm print, a small tuft of hair, a line of salt. These are the places where life breathes slowly, where the divine feels less formal, more familiar. You often find yourself pausing near these quieter corners, not to read omens, but to remember why they matter. Every star you interpret touches someone here, someone sweeping, praying, feeding a child. Babylon is not a city of elites. It's a city of everyday sacredness. That's what your role is meant to honor, even if some forget. You pass by a wall with a carving half-worn by dust and rain, a god with wings, holding a pine cone and a bucket. You remember learning the symbolism once. The pine cone represents purification, the bucket, the source of divine water. But what stays with you isn't the lesson. It's the way the gods' eyes seem to follow you. Not judgmental, not even curious, just present. That's the thing about Babylon. It's not just a city where gods are worshipped. It's a city where they reside. They don't need temples. They're already here, in every brick, every shadow, every echo of sandals on stone. You stop near a small square where astrologers sometimes gather. The sky is too bright for readings now, but they still sit, murmuring over tablets, sipping warm date wine. One of them, an older man with a braided beard and missing teeth, nods at you. "You heard the eclipse will come next month?" he asks. You nod. "I saw it on the chart." He leans closer. "And do you feel it?" That's the difference between them and you. They read, you feel. Sometimes, you don't answer. At midday, the heat thickens. Babylon becomes quieter. Dogs stretch under shadows. Merchants fan themselves with reeds. Even the priests retreat to cooler chambers, their voices lowered. You walk slower. The city smells now of dust, sweat, and figs softening in the sun. And yet, even now, there's no true silence. A child sings in Sumerian, the words strange on her young tongue. Somewhere a harp plays, faint and halting. From a tower, a priest pours water with ritual precision, letting it splash in rhythm, a prayer through sound. You close your eyes for a moment, and in that moment, you realize the gods are always talking, even when the stars are hidden. Even when no one's looking up, Babylon listens, and because you walk her streets, breathe her air, and carry her dust beneath your fingernails, you listen too. Before the voice comes the breath. Before the breath, the silence. And before the silence, a sign. This is the order of things in your world. Not logic first, not speech, not reason, but signs. Always signs. The universe does not explain itself through sentences. It twitches, shifts, glimmers, and waits to see if you are paying attention. As an adivinho in Babylon, you were never trained to understand the world. Understanding is too clean a word, too modern. You were trained to listen to the fragments, the oddities, the hairline cracks in what should be smooth. Because the divine, they said, never came in whole pictures. It came in pieces, in the broken clay, the off-color cloud, the way the oil didn't settle right in the bowl. You learned this not from scrolls, but from watching. It started, as many things did, with the liver. The liver, your master told you, was not just an organ. It was a replica of the cosmos, an entire world flattened into soft tissue and vein. Every rise, every depression, every curve, a message. The gods didn't write letters. They shaped sheep. Your first time was not ceremonial. No incense, no crown. Just you, your tutor, and a lamb so small it trembled in your hands. He cut it carefully, without drama, and pulled the liver out like a delicate scroll. He set it on a flat stone, wiped the blood with a cloth soaked in cedar, and gestured for you to look. "See this?" he said, pointing to a small bump on the right lobe. "That means joy. But only if the gallbladder hangs forward. If it doesn't, well, then it means the opposite." It was always like that. Every rule had a counter-rule. Every symbol, a shadow version of itself. At first, it drove you mad. But over time, something shifted. Not in the signs, in you. You stopped trying to memorize and started to feel. The way a musician feels a rhythm before counting it. You began to sense when a lobe looked wrong, when a color was off, when a vein should not be so twisted. You didn't have words for it. You didn't need them. Your hands became steady, your eyes sharper. And slowly, the signs began to speak. Not clearly, never in perfect sentences, but in a rhythm, like wind through reeds. like a story half heard in a dream. Then came the pottery, where the liver was fluid and warm, the clay was hard and cold. But it too spoke, in cracks, in shatter lines, in the way it cooled. Sometimes a priest would heat a pot and then splash it with water suddenly, watching how the surface broke. You did this many times, eyes narrowed, breath slow. Each fracture a road, a fork, a warning. They said the gods touched the clay with invisible fingers, breaking it not with violence, but with precision. Other times, it was accidental breaks they watched. A cup dropped, a dish chipped. You were trained to see the meaning in accidents. Because in Babylon, nothing was random. Not really. One day, a serving bowl fell in the temple kitchen, split clean in half. The cooks froze. You were called. You crouched beside the pieces, fingers hovering just above them. You didn't touch, not at first. You traced the line with your eyes, saw how it curved near the base, then veered left. You inhaled. A journey interrupted, you said softly. Someone who should arrive won't. The next day, a messenger from Uruk died en route. His horse collapsed from heat. No one praised you. No one questioned you. It was simply understood. Then there were the clouds. The sky had always felt sacred, but now it became deliberate. You were taught to read not just the stars, but the air between them, the daytime omens, the ones everyone else missed. A cloud that split in two just before sunset. That meant division. If it rejoined before nightfall, reconciliation. If not, watch for discord. A morning mist that lingered past the third hour. A warning from Ishtar. A streak of sunlight cutting through a thunderhead. Favor from Marduk. Maybe. Always maybe. Your master once said, "The gods are clear only when they are angry. When they're calm, they murmur." So you listened to the murmurs. The most difficult signs were the ones inside yourself. A headache that came without cause. A sudden chill in the spine. Dreams that repeated. You learned not to dismiss these. You learned to catalogue your body's whispers. Because sometimes, the gods used you as the sign. You began to keep a record, not on tablets, but in memory. You remembered that one time your left hand tingled for hours before the river flooded unexpectedly. Or the morning your voice cracked, just as the queen miscarried. Coincidence? Perhaps. But coincidence was simply a name for signs we didn't yet understand. You also watched animals. Birds were especially eloquent. A dove circling counterclockwise meant confusion in court. A raven cawing twice from the south. A bad omen for crops. A dog howling at midday. Death. You began to see them everywhere, signs layered upon signs. A cracked tile beneath a chirping sparrow. A flicker of light on an otherwise overcast day. A smell of burning where nothing burned. You never spoke of all of them. Some you kept to yourself. Some were only for you. Because if you spoke too much, the world would listen too closely. And the world, like the gods, did not always appreciate clarity. One of your most memorable lessons came not from your tutor, but from a street performer. He was juggling bones. Small, polished, ivory-coloured. Not real bones, probably. Just carved wood. But he tossed them high into the air, and when they fell, he glanced quickly at their positions and smiled as if he'd just read a story. You asked him, "What did they say?" He grinned. "They said I'd meet a quiet boy today who asks too many questions." You didn't smile, but later, when the bones turned in your mind, you wondered, how many things spoke, and how many did you simply fail to listen to? You began to develop rituals of your own. Not the grand ones, not sacrifices or incantations, but small, private ones. You always stepped into the temple with your right foot first. You always blinked 3 times before reading a new omen. You whispered the name of your mother before examining a liver. Not because it changed the signs, but because it tuned you. like a harp string tightened just so, because being an adivinho wasn't just about reading signs. It was about becoming one. You had to be as sensitive as the world was subtle. You had to echo the divine, not interrupt it. One evening, your tutor took you to the riverbank. The Euphrates was wide, calm, moonlit. He gave you a bowl of water, smooth and round. "Watch," he said. He dropped a single grain of barley into the bowl. It floated. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, it turned. The movement was slight, gentle. "What does it mean?" you asked. He didn't answer, just handed you the bowl. That night, you didn't sleep. You watched the grain all night, turning, tilting, pointing. It never spoke, but somehow you understood. You were still small when they brought you to Esagila, not too small to remember, just small enough to believe you might still run back home if you really wanted to. But Babylon doesn't return what it claims, and Esagila, the Temple of Marduk, was not simply a place. It was a world with its own gravity, its own hours, its own breath. At the entrance, carved lions stood guard, not roaring, watching, their eyes made of stone but somehow never still. As you crossed the threshold, the noise of the outer city, the murmurs of vendors, the slap of sandals, the rustle of the breeze through reeds, all faded like a memory that knew it wasn't welcome here. Inside, everything was heavier. Your first days were spent in silence. Not in forced silence, just the kind that arises naturally when you are surrounded by stone, shadows, and people who seem to have long forgotten how to smile. The air smelled of oil, papyrus, dried figs, and something older, dust maybe, or burnt cedar that had soaked too deep into the walls to ever truly leave. You shared a room with two other boys, older, quieter. One of them never spoke at all. At night, you could hear him breathing, slow and deep, like he was counting something invisible. You later learned he was the son of a high priest. His dreams were considered messages. You, however, were just promising. Days began early, long before the sun rose over the walls of Babylon. A soft chime would sound in the hall, and one by one, you'd pull yourselves from mats that smelled faintly of sheep's wool and old ink. Your first task was always to wash, hands, face, feet, then to pray, quietly, repetitively, not with hope or emotion, but with rhythm. Words meant to tune your body to the divine frequency. Only then came the lessons. The library of Esagila was not what you'd imagined. No scrolls, no leather-bound books, just shelves upon shelves of tablets, clay, squared, etched in cuneiform. Some were fresh and sharp, others cracked, flaking, wrapped in cloth like injured elders. Your job at first was to copy them. You were given a stylus, a block of soft clay, and a model tablet. No instructions. Just a glance from the master. A man with a beard long enough to rest on his lap and eyes so dark you couldn't tell where his pupils ended. And you copied, line by line, symbol by symbol, even when you didn't understand, especially when you didn't understand. Because in Esagila, repetition was prayer. At first, the tablets seemed like nothing more than endless noise. Signs for kings, for floods, for weights of grain and lists of gods too obscure to remember. But slowly, almost painfully slowly, patterns emerged. Some tablets hummed. They carried stories. A priest who read the stars wrong and was exiled. A king who trusted a raven and won a war. A flood that came just as predicted, saving one village, drowning another. These were not myths, they were records, proof that the world had rules, if only you looked closely enough. And so you looked. The masters rarely spoke directly to you. They pointed, nodded. Sometimes corrected a line of text by simply raising an eyebrow. The one who oversaw your group, a thin man named Ashur Mubalit, had a voice like dry papyrus. He once said 6 full sentences to you in one day, and you thought you might faint from the sheer weight of it. He taught astrology, not the kind found in market stalls, but the kind carved into heaven itself. The stars are not gods, he said. They are notes from them, messages passed slowly, faithfully. If you misread, the gods do not get angry. They get distant. That frightened you more than anger ever could. You learned to draw star maps on damp clay, each point placed with obsessive care. You memorized the paths of Venus and Mars, knew how to mark a retrograde by the way your stylus pressed into the surface. You learned when to observe. The second hour of the night, the moment just before sunrise, the cold silence before the evening breeze. And every time you looked up, you realized the sky was bigger than you'd thought the day before. Lessons weren't only written, there were rituals too. You'd spend hours grinding herbs with mortar and pestle, not to brew, but to learn their names, their scents, the way they crumbled under pressure. Cedar, myrrh, juniper, frankincense. Each had meaning. Each had weight in the spiritual world. A certain combination could summon favor, another could dispel a nightmare. You burned them in small bowls, watching the smoke rise and curl. "See how it splits?" one tutor murmured once, for your ears only. "That's the presence of doubt. Do not burn it on a day of decision." You nodded. You remembered. Night was the most sacred time. After meals, quiet, simple, eaten cross-legged in the garden, you were allowed to sit near the temple courtyard. There, under oil lamps and an open sky, came the dreaming. Not sleep. Not quite. A kind of trance between worlds. Some students sat with closed eyes, murmuring fragments of old prayers. Others sketched on clay even as they dozed. You watched, always watching. The stars, the smoke, the way shadows moved along the wall as if something unseen passed behind you. It was during these nights that you felt closest to something real. Not a god, not a voice, just presence. One night, Ashur-Muballit handed you a small, chipped tablet. "This was written 400 years ago," he said. "A boy your age. He read a liver and saw death for a king. He told no one. Days later, the king died. The boy was blamed. You didn't ask why he was showing you this. You understood. Knowledge was not power in a Sagala. It was responsibility, and silence sometimes was the loudest answer. You came to love the temple, not for its beauty, but for its balance. The slow rhythm of study and prayer. The certainty that every act, no matter how small, connected you to something vast. Even sweeping the floor had meaning. Dust is sacred, one priest told you. It is what we return to, and what we read in. You never swept the same way again. Your final test was not announced. One afternoon, Ashur-Muballit brought you to the roof of the ziggurat. He pointed to the west. "What do you see?" You stared. The sky was clear. One cloud, two birds, a slight haze over the river. You said nothing. He nodded. "Correct," and walked away. The stars never sleep. Even when you do, even when your breath has slowed and your thoughts have blurred into dreams of dust and cedar smoke, the stars continue their work above you, whispering across the dark vault like scribes on night duty, ink still wet, stories unfinished. In Babylon, this was never romantic. It was not poetry. It was responsibility. Because the stars were not scenery. They were script. And your life, as an adivinho, was devoted to reading it. You first learned the sky like one learns a foreign tongue. Slowly, awkwardly, with missteps that earned silence more than correction. Your tutor would point, "Ninma's belt." You would look and see nothing but a scatter. Try again. Eventually, your eyes adjusted. Not just your eyes, your patience. Because in Babylon, astrology wasn't a matter of magic. It was math, geometry, observation. Decades of records baked into tablets stored in the darkest rooms of the temple library, where even the oil lamps dared not flicker too loudly. Generations had watched the same points of light move through the black and recorded their messages. You were just one in the long chain of watchers, and that humbled you more than the gods ever could. The sky was divided like a city, regions, quadrants, paths. There were three main roads the stars travelled: the road of Enlil in the north, the road of Anu in the center, and the road of Ea to the south. You memorized them before you even understood their significance, not because you were told to, but because the knowledge began to feel like muscle memory, something stored in your body rather than your mind. Each star that crossed these roads carried meaning. But that meaning changed depending on the season, the day, the moon's position, and even what else was happening on Earth. There were no absolutes, only patterns. And reading those patterns required more than sight. It required stillness. You remember your first full night spent under the sky with your fellow apprentices. No roof, no torches, just a mat, a stylus, a wax tablet, and the stars. The night began warm, the wind gentle. Someone whispered a joke, nervous laughter, quickly hushed. Then, silence. One by one, stars emerged. First the brightest, Venus, shimmering like a polished coin. Then others, dimmer but no less important. A constellation unfolded above you, like a curtain drawn back slowly. You traced lines in your mind. The archer, the goatfish, the heavenly twins. But then came the real work, tracking movement. You were expected to note the precise position of a given star relative to the horizon, the temple tower, the north wall. You recorded not just where it was, but where it would be. Because prediction was not an art, it was obligation. Anyone can see, your teacher said. Only the trained can foresee. The stars were called mul, celestial signs, each with its own name, story, meaning. Some carried blessings. Mulgudana, the bull of heaven, brought strength to warriors. Others warned. Mulmash, the snake, heralded betrayal or illness. And others still were ambiguous, like Mulkaksidi, a dim cluster whose influence depended on the moon's mood. That was the hardest part. Nothing was ever just one thing. The sky never told you what to do. It told you what might happen, what was probable. You learned to think in shadows, in probabilities, in nudges. Much of your training was spent bent over clay, copying tables of star risings and settings. On the third night of Nisanu, Jupiter appears in the eastern sky. If the moon is bright, the harvest will be plentiful. If the moon is dark, pestilence will come. These lines weren't poetry. They were laws, encoded in celestial light. You memorized hundreds of them until your fingers ached from pressing the stylus, until your dreams were filled with stars that wouldn't sit still. But slowly, it sank in. The stars weren't random. They were deliberate. And if you listened long enough, they would teach you how to think like them. You began to notice things that others didn't. A haze near Saturn that meant more than weather. A delay in Mars's rise that hinted at unrest. A halo around the moon, so faint most ignored it. But you felt it, like a word half remembered. You stopped needing to look everything up. You just knew, not with certainty. Never that, but with something better. Intimacy. The royal astrologers taught you how to cast horoscopes, not for individuals, but for days, for cities, for crops. They'd sit with their back to the wind, stylus in hand, and say, "Today is under the dominion of the goat star. Avoid travel, favor sacrifice, delay trade." These predictions were delivered to the palace in sealed tablets, and the king listened. It humbled you to know that a flicker of light on a distant point in the night could influence a crown. But it also frightened you. Because what if you were wrong? There were nights when the sky betrayed you. Clouds rolled in, veiling the signs. Or stars blurred in the heat, their paths untraceable. Once, during an eclipse, the entire temple trembled, not physically, but with fear. Eclipses were omens of death, always, no exceptions. The priests fasted, the streets emptied, a substitute king was crowned, a peasant dressed in royal garb, fed like a prince, then killed days later. The real king returned to the throne, cleansed. You never slept that night, because you had seen the eclipse coming, and said nothing. You were taught to keep star journals, not just tablets of raw data, but reflections. What did you feel? The priest would ask. Not just what you saw. At first, this seemed like mysticism, but over time, you understood. Astrology in Babylon was not cold calculation. It was relationship. Between you and the sky, between the gods and your intuition. The stars weren't there to command. They were there to guide, gently, insistently, like a friend who never raises their voice but never stops speaking. One night, much later, you sat alone on the roof of a sagila. The city below slept, or pretended to. Fires flickered behind shuttered windows. Dogs barked in the distance. But above, the sky was pristine. You looked up and saw a new star. Just there. Faint, but real. You recorded it. And in that moment, you realized this sky, this language, was still writing itself. You were not a reader of a finished book. You were a scribe, mid-sentence, and your hand would tremble, yes, but you would write anyway. Not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of expectation, the kind that wraps itself around your shoulders like a weighted cloak. You've worn that cloak many times, but it never truly grows lighter. In the center of the stone table, the lamb lies still. Its breath has long stopped, but the body is still warm. There's a thin line of blood trailing from the throat, no longer dripping. A bowl of water rests nearby, not to cleanse the hands, but to collect reflection. And beside it, a tray holds polished bronze tools, gleaming faintly in the morning light filtered through a lattice of reed and clay. You stand ready, feet bare, eyes steady, heart slower than usual, trained to beat in rhythm with the ritual, not with fear. Because today, you're not just a man, you are a listener of entrails. Hepatoscopy, the reading of the liver, is the oldest, most intimate conversation between humans and the divine in Babylon. More ancient than the stars, more direct than dreams. Where the sky speaks in riddles, the liver speaks in shape. But it doesn't shout, it whispers. And you were trained, slowly, painfully, to hear it. It began with memorization. Your first months of training were spent not with sheep, but with clay, a model liver, life-sized, hard and cold, etched with marks. You traced them again and again with your stylus. 55 named parts, each with meaning, each connected to gods, seasons, emotions, outcomes. The head of the liver, the path, the finger, the gate, the cup of life, the pit of the enemy. Names like poetry, shapes like geography. You didn't understand them at first. Not truly. They felt arbitrary, forced, like pretending to read meaning into the knots of a tree. But repetition did its work, and slowly you began to see. When your hands were finally allowed to touch the real thing, soft, wet, alive just moments before, it felt like sacrilege. Not fear, not disgust, reverence. The liver was not just an organ, it was a world, and you were being invited to enter. The texture was unlike anything else. Firm, but yielding. Slick, but not slippery. The smell, metallic, musky, earthy, would cling to your nostrils for hours, sometimes days. You learned to breathe through it. But most of all, you learned to slow down. Because the liver reveals itself only in stillness. The procedure is sacred. The lamb is selected carefully, unblemished, calm, pure. It is brought in silence, laid on a cloth of linen and reed. A short prayer is said, never too elaborate, never rushed. The gods must be honored, not impressed. Then, with one clean cut, the lamb is opened. No dramatics, no theatrics, just precision. The liver is removed with practiced hands, washed gently in cedar water and placed on a flat surface. Still warm, still pulsing with the residue of life. You lean in and listen. Each part of the liver offers a line of the message. If the cup of life is full and smooth, good fortune lies ahead. If the finger is bent inward, expect betrayal. A crease across the path? Danger in travel. A hollow in the gate. Someone close to you harbors a secret, but nothing is read in isolation. Every mark, every bump, every shadow must be read in relation to the rest. The language of the liver is not a list. It is a conversation. One part may say yes, another no. And your job, your sacred duty, is to reconcile them. You were taught never to rush. There's an urge, always, especially when the question is urgent, the asker powerful, the pressure immense, to speak quickly, to give answers. But haste is heresy. The gods don't speak in haste, and neither should you. So you pause. You tilt your head. Look at the sheen of the surface, the tension of the vessels. You trace a line with the tip of your stylus, not to mark, just to sense the depth. You ask questions, not aloud, inwardly. What does this mean? Why now? Where is the contradiction? And somewhere, between breath and silence, the answer comes. The most profound readings you ever gave were the ones that made no sense at first. Like the day a general came, asking if the campaign should begin. The liver was perfect. Too perfect. No blemishes, no creases, no tension. Like a blank tablet. You hesitated. The general pressed. Does this not mean success? You shook your head. It means the gods have nothing to say. He laughed. Then we proceed. And he did. And he failed. Because sometimes silence is the message, and reading that silence is the hardest thing of all. The priests of Esagila have debates about hepatoscopy. Not allowed. Never in front of outsiders. But in shadowed halls, after the candles have burned low and the tablets are closed, they ask, do the gods shape the liver, or do they simply choose when we will notice? Is the lamb chosen by chance, or led by divine will? Are we readers, or are we co-authors? You don't know the answers. You only know the liver never lies. But it doesn't always tell the truth either. One evening, during a lunar eclipse, you performed a reading for a widow. She brought no gifts, no offerings, only fear. Her son had vanished, 3 nights gone. She begged for insight. You had no obligation to help. She had no status, no gold. But you agreed. The lamb was small, with trembling legs. The liver, once opened, was jagged, misshapen. The cup of life was torn. You read aloud, he is not dead, but he walks away from her, not toward. She wept, and thanked you. Later, you wondered if you had seen the truth, or simply offered the only mercy the gods allowed. You never saw her again. Years pass. You've performed hundreds of readings, some routine, some devastating. A king once asked if his wife would bear him a son. The liver trembled in your hand, a fold, sharp and sudden, cut across the finger. You said, she will bear pain, not fruit. She died in childbirth. The king never looked at you again. And still, you continue. Because this is not a role, it is a vow. The entrails of the lamb are no longer strange to you. They are familiar. Like an old friend who speaks only in half-finished thoughts. You learn to listen better, to slow even further, to read what is not written. The chamber where you perform the readings is modest. Stone floor, reed mats, a bowl of water, a narrow window letting in filtered light. You clean it yourself. Always. Not because you are lowly, but because it matters. The gods do not reveal themselves in filth. and the signs only appear to those who make room for them. So you clean. You light the lamp. You wash your hands in silence, and you wait for the next lamb, folded tightly, carried by a boy with no shoes, no words, and eyes that dart like the tails of lizards in the heat. He doesn't enter the temple, just waits at the threshold, holding the clay tablet in his outstretched hands. You take it gently. It is warm from his skin, smooth with the polish of urgency. Your fingers recognize the royal seal before your eyes do. A lion with its head turned backwards, the sign of introspection, or perhaps regret. You exhale. The king wants a reading, and not just any reading, not a simple matter of travel dates or dream interpretations. This is something weighty. It always is, when the seal comes with no name, no scribe, no context. When the king calls, you don't ask why. You prepare. No one in Babylon envies the adivinho when he's summoned to the palace. Respect, yes. Fear, sometimes. But envy? Never. Because when a king asks a question, it's never rhetorical. He doesn't want curiosity. He wants certainty. And the gods, cruel, poetic, distant, rarely offer that. Yet you must translate their murmur into something that sounds like clarity, and carry that answer like a blade across your own neck. The walk to the palace is long, though not in distance. You're escorted, 2 guards, silent, eyes ahead. The city watches you pass, though no one meets your gaze. To see a reader summoned is to see possibility, or doom made flesh. You walk past merchants rearranging jars of honey and copper, past children sweeping temples, steps with hands too small for the broom, past dogs who tilt their heads at your scent, sensing something has shifted. At the gates you bow, not to the guards, not even to the king, to the threshold, because once you cross it, you don't belong to yourself. Inside, the palace is cooler, thicker. Walls painted with stories, wars won, lions tamed, cities burning under the weight of Babylonian might. None of them show the advisors who bled behind those victories. None show the readers who warned of storms too late. You're led into a narrow chamber. Cushions line the walls, but you remain standing. Eventually, the king enters. No fanfare, no crown today. Just a man with a burden he hasn't yet named. He doesn't speak right away. He circles you once, hands clasped behind his back, like a judge inspecting an untrustworthy witness. Then, "Should we march?" That's all he says. No explanation, no names, no context. But you understand, there is a border, there is a tension, there is a silence growing louder in the eastern provinces. And the king wants the gods to answer what his generals cannot. You bow, not in submission, in acknowledgement. You are not his servant, you are his risk, and he knows it. You request the lamb. The sacrifice is done quickly, efficiently. The liver is placed before you on a slab of white stone. The chamber is dim, lit only by a single shaft of light from above. The smell is clean, clinical, not of death but of consequence. You bend over the liver and listen. At first glance, the signs are contradictory. The cup is full, a good omen, but the finger is bent, danger from within. The path is smooth, success in the journey, but the gate is narrow, limited return. You pause, breathe. Look again. This is not a no. This is not a yes. This is a knife balanced on its point. You straighten, face the king, speak slowly. The gods do not oppose your march, but they offer caution. Victory lies ahead, but only if betrayal is dealt with first. One close to you hides venom. You do not name names. You never name names. That is not your place. That is his burden. The king nods once, does not thank you, just leaves. Your work is done, but its weight lingers. 3 weeks later, you hear of a rebellion. Not at the front, at the court. A vizier executed, letters intercepted, coins hidden under tiles, A plot unearthed. Only then does the army move. And it wins. In the city, people whisper. The Adivinho saw it. They say this with awe and with fear, because to see truth so clearly is not a gift, it is a threat. You are called again. Different king, different war, same tension, but this time the liver gives nothing. Blank. Still. The blood drains too fast. The surface is smooth, unreadable. You wait, breathe, beg inwardly for something. A fold, a crease, a tremble. Nothing. You tell the king, the gods are silent. He does not accept that. Orders another lamb. Same result. Another. Still nothing. He strikes the altar with his ringed fist, sending blood across your robe. They cannot be silent. But they are. And silence, too, is a sign. Afterwards, you are not punished. But you are not called for many months. In that time, you reflect. Why do kings ask at all? Not because they want the God's will, but because they want permission to do what they've already decided, to cloak action in divine approval. You provide the cloak, and sometimes the warning. But you learn over years that not all kings ignore those warnings. One, a young ruler, more priest than warrior, once asked about a marriage, a foreign queen, political alliance. The liver showed division, blood pooling around the gate. Two paths branching. You advised caution. He delayed the union. Months later, her brother declared war on another ally. The king sent offerings to the temple, not in thanks, in apology, because even kings know, adivinhos are not gods, but we speak the closest thing to their voice. In time, you come to dread the summons, not because of danger, but because you know what it costs. To read for a king is to place yourself between power and its consequences, and power rarely forgives messengers. Still, you go. Each time, you open the lamb, you read the folds, you speak the signs, and then you return to your quiet room, wash your hands in cedar water, and pray that the words you gave were the right ones. Because in Babylon, when the king calls, the adivinho listens and trembles. The mistake is not always visible. It doesn't scream. It doesn't collapse walls or darken the sky. Sometimes, the mistake is a whisper in your chest, days after the reading, when you wake in the middle of the night and think, that crease, wasn't that in the wrong place? And suddenly, sleep vanishes like mist before morning. You lie still. The room is quiet. The clay walls breathe around you. Outside, a bird calls, one long note, too short, a rhythm you don't recognize. Or perhaps you do. And you wish you didn't. In Babylon, to err in reading, the signs is not like spilling ink or forgetting a name. It is a rupture, a betrayal, a desecration not of truth, but of order, cosmic, divine, irrevocable. Because every sign you read is believed to be placed there with purpose. The gods don't doodle, they don't stutter. If a sheep's liver twists oddly, or a star hesitates at the horizon, or a pot cracks just so, that's not coincidence, that's communication. And if you misread it, you haven't just misunderstood a symbol. You've misrepresented the will of the gods. You've lied in their name. The fear of that lie follows you everywhere. It doesn't shout. It presses, softly, constantly, like the weight of a wet linen robe clinging to your shoulders. You carry it into every reading, every prayer, every breath. When you were young, your tutor told you about the three who spoke false. They were adivinhos, respected, trained, diligent. The first saw a sign of rain and promised abundance. The harvest rotted in a week-long flood. The second read victory in a smooth liver and sent the army to slaughter. The third saw death in the stars and convinced a family to flee the city. They died on the road. All three were given the same sentence. Exile. Not death, not humiliation, but silence. They were forbidden from speaking of omens again. Their names were scraped from temple records. Their students were reassigned. Their tablets were broken and thrown into the river, because Babylon could forgive failure, but not a broken conversation with the divine. You remember the first time you doubted yourself. It was a small reading. A merchant's daughter had fallen ill, and he brought offerings in trembling hands. The liver was twisted, scarred, perhaps from disease, perhaps from handling. You hesitated, read quickly. Her illness will pass. It didn't. She died that night. The father didn't return. But for weeks afterward, every time you opened a liver, your hands shook. Just a little. Just enough to change the angle of your stylus. Just enough to notice. You began to second-guess every mark. Is that fold truly a gate or a shadow? Is that spot a sign or an accident of light? You revisited old notes, doubted old certainties, dreamed of wrong answers whispered in languages you didn't know. Your master noticed. You're not afraid of being wrong, he said. You're afraid of being seen wrong. And he was right, because Babylon was always watching, and so were the gods. You developed rituals, a breath before each incision, a pause after the first glance, a quiet phrase spoken inwardly. Let me see what must be seen. Not to invoke magic, not to manipulate fate, but to ground yourself, to surrender, because in Babylon, no adivinho controls the signs. You only open your hands and hope they are clean. But some adivinhos did try to control them. You heard whispers of readers who softened the liver with warm cloth to make folds disappear, who reshaped omens with oil to favor their patrons, who let fear or flattery shape their tongues. Some succeeded, for a time, but Babylon is long of memory, and when the city turns on you, it does so quietly, an invitation not extended, a temple door that no longer opens, a name no longer spoken. That's the worst fate of all. Not death, obscurity. And yet, despite all this, the fear, the pressure, the shadow of error, you never left. You kept reading, kept listening, because for all the weight, there was also wonder. There were moments, fleeting, rare, sacred, when the signs lined up with such elegance, such clarity, that you felt the divine pass through you, like a breeze through an open window, effortless, perfect, true. One such moment came during a festival. The city was loud, crowded, unbearable. But a woman came, veiled, modest, older than your mother, asking about her son who'd been taken to serve in a border outpost. You expected noise, distraction, a failed reading. But the liver opened like a book, the gate wide, the finger strong, the cup full. You told her, "He is well. He writes to you tonight. His message will arrive before the moon turns." And it did. 2 days later. You saw her again. She said nothing, just placed a dried flower on the temple step and left. You held on to that moment. Because in Babylon, doubt is the default. Faith, in yourself, in the signs, must be rebuilt every day. Like the walls after the floods, brick by brick, word by word. You keep records, private ones. You write down every reading, and weeks later, months, you return to them. Compare, reflect, not to boast, not to punish, but to learn. Because the fear of error never leaves. It evolves, becomes caution, becomes humility, becomes your shadow. And that shadow keeps you honest. It whispers, "You do not speak for the gods. You only repeat what you believe you heard." And that's enough, because perfection is not your task. Presence is. So you rise each day, you wash your hands, you light the lamp, you open the lamb, and you listen, not for answers, but for direction. Because to be an adivinho in Babylon is not to be certain. It is to be faithful to the uncertainty, and to never stop listening, even when the signs are silent. Not dark, never fully dark, but shaded with purpose. The only light comes from a single oil lamp, its flame steady, low, casting shadows that shift like thoughts on the stone walls. You're seated cross-legged on a reed mat that smells faintly of age and myrrh. In front of you, a bowl of water trembles ever so slightly. A second bowl holds ash. The liver rests between them, and across from you, someone waits. Tonight, it's not a priest, not a scribe, not one of the quiet temple attendants who know how to listen without breathing too loud. It's someone who shouldn't be here, not because they're forbidden, but because their presence unbalances the room. The Queen. She enters quietly, though her very posture demands space. Her robes don't rustle, they float. Her hair is braided tightly, drawn back like the reins of a war chariot. But her eyes, they give her away. They're not just tired, they're afraid. She sits without being invited. Not out of rudeness, out of necessity. This is not a formal audience. No throne, no courtiers, no scribes. Only you and her, and the silence between you. You bow. She does not speak, not yet. Instead, she looks at the liver on the stone. It's already been prepared, cleaned, set, marked. She doesn't flinch at the sight. You suspect she's seen far worse, but she doesn't move either, just studies it, as if waiting for it to speak first. When she finally does speak, her voice is low, controlled, polished like bronze smoothed by years of ritual. There is a dream, she says. You nod. Of course there is. There always is when they come like this, after dark, without entourage, without incense. The dream is the excuse. The liver is the plea. She continues. It comes every fourth night, the same. I am in the garden of Ninhursag, but the leaves are falling, though it is not winter. A snake coils around the pool. My reflection is a stranger. You listen, not to the details, to the pattern. Repetition, season, symbol, distortion. It is not the snake you hear. It is the silence around it. She doesn't ask the question outright. She doesn't have to. Will I be betrayed? Will I lose the crown? Will he take another wife? All versions of the same fear. And that fear is sacred. You treat it as such. You lean forward. Begin the reading. Your hands do not tremble. They cannot. You touch the surface of the liver, not to manipulate, but to sense its warmth, its tension. The cup is full, strong. The finger is curled. The path, cracked. But the gate is wide. You trace the signs with your breath, not your voice. And then softly, you speak. You stand at a crossing. She stiffens. You are seen as more than you are, but not for what you hold. The reflection is not false. It is future. She narrows her eyes. The snake is not your enemy. It is a warning. Of course, you never speak directly. Not with her. You are not here to name traitors or predict crowns falling. You are here to point to the edge of the cliff, not to say who will fall. She says nothing for a long time. Then, and the man? You blink slowly. Always, the question behind the question. You could say many things. You say only, he listens to others, too many. It is not a lie, but it is not quite the truth either. It is enough. She rises. You think she will leave in silence. But at the door, she turns. You read with gentleness, she says. You bow again. I read what the gods allow me to see. She disappears into the corridor, and the shadows settle again. Later that week, the general comes. Different hour, different fear, but the same room. He wears his armor, though there is no need for it here. He does not sit. He paces. He smells of leather, sweat, and caution. He does not speak of dreams. He speaks of borders, of movements, of whispers from the east. I need to know, he says, blunt as stone. Do we hold the line, or do we fall back? You gesture to the stone. The lamb has been chosen. The reading begins. This time, the signs are murkier. The cup is shallow. The finger split. The path, hidden under a crease. But the gate is glowing. You do not know how else to describe it. You hesitate, and he sees it. What is it? You meet his eyes. Victory, but at a price. He frowns. How high? You don't answer. Not because you don't know. Because the price is his son. And you will not say that. Not tonight. He nods, leaves without bowing. You sit alone for a long time. The liver is cooling now. Useless. But still you stare. Because even when the people leave, their questions linger. Their fear echoes. Their silence stains the room. The next morning, the priest asks if you slept. You say yes. He does not believe you. In Babylon, consultations are never just about the signs. They are about the courage to listen. To not run from what the symbols murmur. To hold someone's fear in your palm and not flinch. To know that your words may become their actions and still speak. You often wonder, what happens after? Do they dream differently? Do they change course? Do they regret? You'll never know. They don't return to tell you, and you don't ask. But some nights, when the chamber is still, you remember the way her fingers twitched when you said the word crossing. You remember the way his eyes clouded when you paused before price, and you wonder, did they hear what you really said, or only what they feared most? In the silence, you whisper a prayer, not to Marduk, not to Ishtar, to the silence itself, that it may hold your words with care and release them gently into the hands of those who dare to ask. You were warned early on, clarity is seductive and dangerous. It calls to you like the straightest path in a labyrinth. It whispers promises of certainty, control, the comforting illusion of knowing what will happen next. But in Babylon, the truth rarely walks a straight line, and the presagio, the omen, almost never comes wrapped in perfect light. Most days it arrives obscured, cloaked, half-born. And that is when you must be most careful. Ambiguity is not failure. It is not weakness. It is part of the language the gods speak, a language of shadows, echoes, and reflections on moving water. And your task is not to flatten those meanings. It is to reflect them back, intact, unsettling, true. Because if you strip the omen of its mystery, you strip it of its power. You learned this lesson the hard way. You were still a novice, still desperate to impress, when a priest asked you to interpret a dream, not his, but the king's. The king had seen a lion enter his bedchamber, curl at his feet, and then vanish. Simple, you thought. The lion is your strength. Your rule is secure. You said it boldly, proudly. The priest said nothing, just nodded. Later, your tutor pulled you aside. Perhaps the lion was the symbol of strength, he said, but perhaps it meant the king was being watched. Perhaps it meant the lion had entered because the door was unguarded. Perhaps it was not strength but pride. You said nothing, but you never forgot. Since then, you have spoken with caution. Not fear, not evasion, but awareness. The gods do not speak in declarations. They speak in possibilities, and it is not your place to pretend they said more than they did. Some omens contradict themselves. A liver with both a clear path and a torn cup. A star that rises late but burns brighter than usual. A dream of light, followed by a vision of drowning. These are not errors. These are invitations. To look deeper, to hold both truths at once. You say to the asker, there is favor, but not without sacrifice. There is hope, but not in the direction you're facing. There is movement, but the ground beneath may not hold. At times, this frustrates people. They want yes or no. Should I marry him? Should I sign the treaty? Should I leave before the flood? They look at you with hungry eyes, hearts clenched like fists. And you must offer, what? A maybe, an image, a fragment. You offer what the gods gave, no more, no less. You say, the water rises, but not all who stand are swept away, and they must decide what that means. Because the future is not a tablet, it's a river, and even you cannot see the bottom. This makes you vulnerable to anger, to misunderstanding, to blame. You've been accused of vagueness, of manipulation, of cowardice. But you've also seen what happens when clarity is given too freely. There was a reader, older, once respected, who began giving names, specifics. Your brother plots against you. The 7th day of next month will bring death. Burn cedar in your daughter's chamber, or she will not survive the year. At first, he was celebrated, precise, bold. But the outcomes didn't always match. One wrong name, one mistimed date, one life changed by certainty that should never have been offered. He disappeared. No exile, no trial, just gone. His chamber left untouched for weeks. Even now, the dust is swept around it, never through. The gods, your tutor said, do not punish the hesitant. They punish the arrogant. And clarity, offered too quickly, is often pride in disguise. So you become a master of framing, of tone, of silence. You say, the sign was incomplete, it awaits your decision. You say, this omen speaks more clearly through what it avoids. You say, the gate is narrow, but not locked. And then you wait. Let the listener step forward. Let them claim what they are willing to hear. You've noticed something over time. The most ambiguous signs often linger the longest. A straight answer is comforting, but it fades. Ambiguity plants seeds. It grows. It returns. A man hears, your ally may turn. And weeks later, when the alliance crumbles, he remembers you. Not with blame, with awe. Because you didn't tell him what to do. You told him what might be. And in Babylon, where every gesture could shift the god's mood, that was the greatest gift of all, freedom in uncertainty. There are moments you wish you could offer more. When someone sits before you with eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights, when they clutch an amulet like it might save them, when their lips tremble around a question they can barely say aloud, and you can only offer an image, a pattern, a warning wrapped in fog. But still, you do. Because you are not here to comfort, you are here to reflect, to channel, to pass along what was whispered, no louder than necessary. Sometimes you wish you could lie, just once, to say, yes, he loves you, or no, your child will not die. But lies are not just forbidden, they are ineffective. The gods do not permit them to root, and Babylon remembers. Even the lies whispered only to yourself. One evening, a young man asked you if he should sail to Tyre. The signs were vague. The finger bent left, the gate obscured. The water in the bowl formed a double ripple. You said, you may go far, but you may not return whole. He stared at you, then nodded, and left. A year later, he returned, limping. One eye covered, but alive and wealthy. He left a single gold coin on your table, didn't speak, didn't need to. You think often of that moment, not for the outcome, but for the fact that ambiguity, when honored, became truth, not prediction, companion. The presagio is rarely clear, but in its haze, it invites something better than certainty. It invites humility. It reminds you that you are not a god, that they do not speak in bold type, that they trust you to handle their silence with grace. So you do. You learn to live in the middle, to speak carefully, to hold ambiguity not as failure, but as sacred ground, where the future still breathes, and where the listener must choose their own next step. Night in Babylon is never truly quiet. Even when the wind softens, when the streets empty, when the market fires are doused and the last chant from the ziggurat fades into darkness, something still stirs. You stir, not because of noise, but because of presence. Because when the body finally rests, the soul begins its wandering, and you, adivinho, cannot afford to sleep without listening. Because dreams, too, are messages, and silence, in the dark, is never empty. You do sleep, but lightly, never deeply enough to forget where you are. Not since your training began, not since you were told that dreams are not just images, but encounters, that when you dream, you are not alone in your own head. You are crossing into a space where the gods leave footprints, where the dead sometimes whisper, where signs unfold like petals, then vanish with the morning. They call it oneiromancia, and it is not a science, it is a surrender. Your training in dreams didn't begin with visions. It began with memory. You were taught how to wake slowly, how to stay still when your eyes first open. No movement, no speaking, just holding the fragments of sleep in your hands like clay not yet hardened. Each morning, you sat at the edge of your mat and spoke your dream aloud to the wall. Not for the wall, for yourself, for the memory, for the shape of what had passed through you in the night. Then you wrote. Not long passages, just signs, symbols, a cup, a snake, a broken wheel, a child holding fire. You didn't try to explain them, you let them sit. Because dreams don't yield their meanings to force, they soften under attention. You were taught the categories of dreaming. The true dream, sent from the gods. The false dream, from your own troubled heart. The mixed dream, real symbols, misordered. And the visitation, when someone not alive appears, unbidden. The line between them is not clear, not always. But you learn to feel the difference, like tasting water for the trace of salt. Some signs are well known. Falling teeth means loss. A broken stare means delay. A river flowing backward means a warning not yet spoken. But others are more personal. A white dog, running. A face made of light. The sound of birds that don't exist. These you must learn for yourself. Each adivinho has a different lexicon. Yours was shaped over years. You keep a clay tablet near your bed. Each night, you mark it with 3 signs before sleep, an offering to the unknown. And each morning you compare what you saw with what you hope to see. Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't, but even that is a message. There are rituals, of course. Bathing in cedar water before sleep, burning juniper near your door, sleeping with your head pointed north toward the stars, eating nothing after the 2nd hour of darkness, not speaking anger before rest, all to quiet the self, to make space for the divine to enter. Because the gods won't shout over your thoughts. They wait for the stillness. You've had dreams that stayed with you for years. One in particular. You walk into the temple, but everything is reversed. The fire burns blue. The priests speak in reverse, and at the center, where the altar should be, there's only a mirror. But it shows you as a child, not afraid, just watching. That dream came the night before a great flood broke the eastern wall. You didn't understand it then, but afterward, it made sense. Sort of. And even now, when the sky turns grey in a certain way, you remember the mirror, and you wonder who was watching whom. People come to you with dreams, desperate, curious, terrified. A soldier dreaming of being buried alive. A midwife who keeps hearing crying from empty cradles. A merchant who dreams of coins that melt into water. You don't give answers, you ask questions. How did you feel in the dream? What color was the light? Did anyone speak, or only look? Because interpretation is not translation, it is reflection. You hold the dream up like a tablet in sunlight, and let them see what they already feared, or hoped. Some dreams are shared. 2 people, miles apart, dream the same image. The gods do this when urgency is needed, or when no one is listening by day. You once recorded a dream of a tree struck by fire but not burned. The next morning, another priest described the same vision. Neither of you had spoken. That week, a city fell, but a single family survived beneath a grove of trees. Coincidence? Perhaps. But Babylon does not believe in coincidence, only in missed signs. There are dangers too. Dreams can lie. They can show what you wish to see: a lover returning, a victory already won, a child being born safely. These are the most dangerous dreams because they feel like gifts, but they are veils, and veils in Babylon are warnings. You've learned to be skeptical of sweetness, to trust only the dreams that leave you uneasy, those that sit in your chest like a stone. Those are the ones worth writing down, worth sharing, worth dreading. The hardest dreams are the ones you can't speak. The ones that show you yourself, not as you are, but as you might have been. Cruel, silent, wrong. You've dreamed of turning away from an omen, of laughing at the signs, of watching the city burn from a tower and doing nothing. You wake from those dreams in sweat and spend the day in silence, not for guilt, but for gratitude, because they remind you what vigilance costs and what it protects. The gods do not always send dreams, but when they do not waste them. You believe this. Even now, even when a week passes with nothing but meaningless fragments, sheep with 6 legs, doors that won't open, rain inside your room. Even then, because the pattern is bigger than one night, and your role is to keep showing up. Sometimes a single image stays with you longer than 100 omens. A field of black birds all facing west. A candle that will not go out, no matter how much wind you feel. A face that is yours, but older. You don't know what they mean, not yet. But you carry them, like talismans, like warnings, like keys. And so, you sleep lightly, you rise slowly, you speak carefully, because you are not just the reader of signs in liver or sky, you are also the recorder of the night. And in Babylon, where dreams are treated like scrolls written in fire and silence, that is a sacred duty, one not given, but earned, each restless night, each breath in the dark. Each quiet morning, when you hold your own dream like a bird and choose whether to let it fly or keep it close. You walk through the marketplace and no one says your name aloud. They glance, yes. They whisper, certainly. But they do not greet you with the warmth offered to a neighbor or the deference given to a priest. You are not embraced by the world outside the temple. You are tolerated by it, or feared. Because to some, you are a holy man. To others, a fraud. And to many, most, you are something worse, a mirror. Babylon is full of believers. It is also full of skeptics. And both look at you with the same expression, suspicion tempered by curiosity. They want to believe, but not too much. They want to dismiss you, but not completely. You've seen men laugh at you in the tavern, then come to your door before dawn, eyes wide with terror, asking if the broken bowl in their home means their wife will miscarry. You've seen women spit at the temple steps, then leave figs and honey in secret when the moon turns red. They say they don't believe, but they never stop watching. You understand? The work you do is not easy to love. It's not beautiful, not comforting. It is strange. You read sheep's livers. You watch birds. You dream things no one else dreams. You sit in the back of ceremonies with eyes half closed, as if listening to a voice no one else hears. You are apart, even when you stand among them. Especially then, some call you charlatan. They mock your readings, mutter about clever guesses, suggest you merely echo what others are too afraid to say aloud. They say your omens are just a way to control the weak. They laugh when you pass, though never when you look directly at them. You do not respond, you never do, because truth does not need to defend itself. And besides, their fear speaks louder than their scorn. But others call you prophet. They believe every word, too much. They cling to your silences. They write down your pauses. They interpret your shrugs as signs from the heavens. They come to you not for guidance, but for permission. Should I leave him? Should I buy the boat? Should I name my daughter after the moon? You try to guide gently, but their faith is heavy, and sometimes blinding. You once warned a merchant that the signs around his journey were unclear, that the gods offered no blessing, but no curse either. He took that to mean approval. He sailed, his boat sank, he survived, barely, returned with scars and silence, and he never looked at you the same way again, not with hatred, with hurt, as if you had failed to save him from himself. You've learned, no matter what you say, you will be misunderstood. Clarity breeds false security, ambiguity breeds resentment, and silence can be mistaken for anything. Still, you speak, because the signs deserve it, because someone must. Children are the only ones who treat you naturally. They aren't afraid to ask real questions. Do the stars get bored? Do the gods like us? Can dreams come true even if you don't tell anyone? You always answer them with honesty, or stories, or silence. Because with children, silence is never mistaken for arrogance, only for mystery. And mystery, to them, still feels like magic. Once, a boy followed you home, didn't say a word, just walked behind you for blocks. When you turned, he asked, "Is it hard?" Knowing. You thought for a moment, then said, "It's harder not knowing, but it's lonelier knowing." He nodded. Didn't follow you again, but you saw him years later at the temple gates, with a stylus in his hand. Sometimes it's the educated who distrust you most, the scribes with their tablets and laws and tidy lines of logic. To them, you are messy, subjective, unreliable. But even they come in secret, especially when their wives stop sleeping, especially when their sons go missing. They always ask the same way. "I know it's nonsense, but could you look at this liver for me?" You never mock them, because belief has many doors, and not all of them look sacred from the outside. The priests respect you, but keep their distance. They honor the gods in public, in song, in structure. You honor them in silence, in blood, in sleep. They wear clean robes and recite memorized lines. You wear the scent of sacrifice. They think in certainty. You live in doubt. It's an uneasy alliance, but a necessary one, because Babylon needs both. You've seen people come undone by your words, and others rebuilt. You once told a woman that the signs said, "Endings that make room." She wept, not because it was clear, but because it was kind. She later returned with her daughter, said only, "You were right. You don't chase followers. You don't sell amulets or blessings. You read, you interpret, you reflect, sometimes with grace, sometimes with trembling, but always with care. Because this work, your work, is not about being believed. It's about bearing witness to what the gods reveal, to what the people refuse to see. You are not a prophet, not really. You are not a charlatan either. You are a threshold, a place between silence and voice, between question and consequence. And that place is rarely comfortable, but it is sacred, even if no one admits it aloud. At night, when the city grows quiet and you walk the temple corridors alone, you often hear echoes, not of voices, of labels, liar, seer, fool, visionary. You let them pass through you, like wind through leaves, because you know who you are, not because the gods told you, but because the signs continue to come, and you still choose to listen. And tomorrow, someone will knock on your door, ash on their forehead, fear in their mouth, hope in their hand. And they will ask, "What do you see?" And you will look, And you will say, let's listen together. Not hidden, but unnoticed. The way smoke slips between baskets of grain. The way wind moves cloth but leaves no mark. The way someone familiar feels when they're just far enough not to be recognized. You are not dressed differently from the others. A simple tunic, sandals with worn leather, a cloth bag over your shoulder, containing nothing but your stylus and a tablet. And yet, no one calls your name. You are there, but you are not of there. In the marketplace, you are invisible. The vendors shout over each other, their voices rising like birds startled from a tree. Fresh pomegranates, goat cheese from Kish, amulets for good sleep. A child runs past you laughing, a fig half-eaten in her hand. Someone brushes your arm, apologizes, doesn't recognize your face. And you are glad, because here, anonymity is freedom. No questions, no fear. No signs to read in spilled oil or bent copper coins. Just noise, just life. But walk a little farther, past the market, through the inner gate, into the palace courtyard, and the air changes. The guards straighten, the courtiers hush. Your name is announced softly, as if even the syllables might invoke something unwanted. The same hands that bumped you at the pomegranate stall now clasp in front of robes. The same mouths that muttered about charlatans now whisper your titles. You are reader of signs, eye of the hidden, voice of the third silence. They speak as if your presence changes the walls, as if your footsteps summon fate. You don't let it reach your heart, because tomorrow you'll be ignored again. That is the life of the adivinho. Sacred when summoned, silent when dismissed, always standing at the edge of visibility. You've learned to move between these roles with care, to nod politely to those who bow too low, to not take offense at those who forget you exist, to speak softly when in silk-covered halls, to eat quietly when among stone and dust, because your power isn't in your voice, it's in the listening. And listening requires stillness, inside and out. In the temple, they ask for your judgment. In the street, they ask for none. A man once dropped a bundle of scrolls at your feet and didn't notice you helping him gather them. He thanked you, then asked if you knew where the nearest scribe lived. You said no, and smiled. But when you are called to the inner chambers, the change is total. There, your opinion is law, or nearly. Your words move armies, shift treaties, delay weddings, cancel executions. You once spoke a sentence, one phrase, and a feast was postponed for 10 days. You once said a reading was uncertain, and a border remained unguarded for a week. You did not ask for this power, but it follows you like a shadow. And like all shadows, it lengthens when the light is harshest. This duality, it confuses even you sometimes. You sit on a cushion of linen and frankincense, reading the stars for the king, then walk home alone through alleyways that smell of fish and wet clay, where a dog growls at your feet. You speak in whispers to royalty, then barter for onions with a woman who calls you that odd temple man. You read fate in liver folds, then wait in line at the well. You belong to both worlds. Which means you belong fully to neither. This is the price of vision, not the seeing itself, the distance it creates, between you and others, between you and yourself. But there are moments of balance, when someone in the market meets your eyes and simply nods, not out of fear, not out of reverence, but out of knowing, as if to say, I see you, I see the weight, I won't add to it. Those are the moments you carry with you, because they feel like home, and home, for you, is rare. A scribe once told you, we write truth for others to read, you read truth others would rather not see. You didn't answer, but you thought about it for weeks, because it was almost true. Almost. The truth is this, you are not what they think, not a mystic, not a fraud, not a sage, not a servant. You are a presence, A reminder that the gods are watching, that silence has shape, that nothing, not even a cracked bowl or a passing cloud, is meaningless. And so in the palace they treat you like a vessel, and in the street they treat you like a stranger, and in the temple they treat you like a question. But you treat yourself like a flame, not because you burn, because you light, briefly, and then dim, until called again. You once passed by a child drawing stars in the dust with her finger. She asked you, "Do they talk to you?" You said, "Sometimes." She smiled. "They don't talk to me, but I still look." That's all anyone wants, really. To know the silence means something. To know that even if the gods don't speak, they see, and that someone, maybe you, is listening. So you return to your chambers each evening. You wash your hands. You write what you saw, what you didn't, what might have been a sign, and then you sleep, or try to, until the next knock, until the next palace summons, until the next morning in the market where you'll walk unseen. And remember, power isn't always being seen. Sometimes it's being needed when it matters most, and forgotten when it doesn't. And you have made peace with that. The sky does not scream when it turns. It whispers at first, a shift in colour, a softness where there should be clarity, a stillness in the breeze that feels more like a pause than a calm. You notice it before the others do. The stars that should have risen don't, or they rise in places they never belonged. And in that moment, long before the city understands, you know, something is coming. In Babylon, the sky is more than a roof. It is a scroll, a warning, a witness. So when it darkens in the middle of the day, not with clouds, but with something heavier, colder, wrong, people feel it in their bones. Children cry. Dogs grow restless. Vendors forget to haggle. And all eyes turn upward, then downward, then to you. The first time you saw an eclipse, you were still a novice. You didn't know what it was, only that your mentor sat with his back against the wall of the observatory, hands clasped tightly, face pale. He whispered, "Don't look at the sun." And you didn't, but you felt it. A drop in temperature, a shift in the air, a trembling, not of the earth, but of the world beneath it. When the sun returned, he turned to you and said, "This was not a mistake, this was a message." Then he stood and went to write the substitute king's name. Yes, substitute king. Because in Babylon, when the eclipse comes, the king is no longer king, not for a few days. He is hidden, protected, replaced by a stand-in, often a prisoner, a servant, a farmer chosen in haste. They dress him in robes, feed him the king's food, let him sit on the throne, and then quietly remove him. Because someone must absorb the bad omen, someone must bear the weight, and better a shadow than the real thing. You read the omens for those days with care, not in liver, not in stars, but in faces. The servant who won't meet your eye, the scribe who asks too many questions, the silence at the palace that feels thicker than the stone. Because when the sky turns, the city holds its breath. And you must choose when to exhale. Comets are worse. They do not come gently. They streak across the sky like an accusation. Too fast, too bright, too wrong. People scream, run, pray. You do none of these things. You go to the temple, you light the lamp, and you write. Because comets are not events, they are entries. In a book only you know how to read. One appeared the night before the palace caught fire. You had seen it, not in the sky, but in a dream. A torch falling into water that boiled, not cooled. You tried to warn the guards. They laughed. Then the roof burned. The fire stopped before it reached the throne room. but just barely. No one laughed after that. Floods are different. They are not messages. They are consequences. You see them in advance, not in the clouds, but in the signs. A crack in the path. A dove that refuses to fly east. A dream where fish walk on land. You warn. Sometimes they listen. They pile sandbags, dig trenches, move stores of grain to higher ground. And sometimes they wait until the river swells, until the bridge groans, until the water eats the streets like hungry wind. And then they come to you, not with questions, with pleas. What should we do? You want to say, you should have listened, but you don't. You say, wait, watch, pray. Because sometimes that's all that's left. During these times you feel both powerful and powerless. You know the signs, you speak their language, but you cannot stop the flood. You cannot unburn the palace. You cannot make the stars shine in their proper places again. All you can do is be steady, like the stone in the river that doesn't move, even when everything around it does. You become more than an interpreter. You become anchor, reassurance, not because you promise safety, but because you refuse to promise anything. Only presence, only truth, only the words the gods gave you, unpolished, unflinching, real. There are nights when the sky stays clouded for days, when no one sees the moon, when no stars break through, and people begin to murmur. Have the gods turned away? Have we offended them? Is the darkness permanent? You light the lamps in the temple yourself, one by one, even when no one watches, especially then. Because light, in darkness, is not for vision, it's for memory. You remember one boy, small, thin, eyes too old. His village had flooded, his father lost, his mother silent. He stood at the temple gate and asked, "Is the world broken?" You knelt, took his hand, said, "No, it's still speaking. We just have to listen harder." He nodded, didn't cry, just stood there, listening. In those moments, you understand your true role, not to predict, not even to warn, but to accompany, to walk with others through the dark, holding one end of the thread, until the signs return, until the sky clears, until the gods speak again, and when they do, when the stars find their places once more, when the dove flies east, when the dreams soften, you do not celebrate, you exhale, quietly, and light one more lamp, for the ones who are gone, for the ones who remained, and for the silence that taught you what listening really means. They often ask you, what will happen? It's always the first question, always asked with urgency, with fear, with trembling beneath the voice, even when the words are spoken calmly. Sometimes it's whispered, as if the mere volume might trigger fate. Sometimes it's shouted, as if the gods respond faster to louder mouths. But always, the question is the same. What will happen? And always, your answer begins the same way. I don't know. You're not being evasive. You're not protecting yourself. You're honoring the truth. Because to be an adivinho in Babylon is not to know what will happen. It is to know what might, and to recognize the difference is sacred. To forget, it is dangerous. You don't foresee. You interpret. You don't dictate. You translate. The difference seems subtle, but it holds the entire weight of your existence. Because people want oracles, but the gods do not send oracles. They send impressions, signs, threads, fragments. And you, tired, careful, reverent, you try to weave them into something the human heart can bear. The signs don't shout. They whisper. They gesture. They give you edges, not pictures. They speak in folds of liver, flickers of stars, slants of shadow in dreams. And each time you see them, you must ask, what does this mean now? Because the same sign, in a different context, speaks a different truth. A full cup once meant peace. Then, one year, during a season of failed rains and unrest, it meant resignation. You didn't change. The world did. And the gods, they respond not to stillness, but to movement, to change, to choices already stirring beneath the surface. You are not chosen to decide. You are chosen to notice. And to speak of what you notice, carefully, without adding, without subtracting, without turning signs into sentences they never wrote. That's harder than it sounds, because the temptation is constant. The temptation to help, to reassure, to guide more clearly than the gods allowed. They ask, will I survive? And everything in you wants to say, yes. But the liver only says, uncertainty in the gate. The stars only offer, Mars lingers too long in the house of air. The dream only shows, a rope fraying but not snapping. So you say what you saw, nothing more, and let them walk forward into the mist. Some thank you, most don't, because honesty rarely comforts, but it's never your job to comfort. It's your job to hold the mirror, to reflect the message, not craft it. You didn't write the dream. You didn't carve the sky. You didn't shape the trembling in the lamb's liver. You only report. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you faithful. To a voice not your own. To a rhythm you didn't invent. Your tutor once said, the gods speak in layers. If you offer the world only one, you blind it. You carry that sentence everywhere. In your palm when you draw the signs. In your breath when you speak before kings. In your dreams when you wake too early, heart beating like a drum that heard something it shouldn't. You are not infallible. You have misread. You have wondered. You have been unsure. But you have never claimed more than you received. That is your oath. And in Babylon, it is enough. People think of adivinhos as doorways to certainty. They are wrong. You are a lantern carried into a cave. You illuminate what's ahead, but only a little. And never all at once. That limitation isn't failure. It's protection. From arrogance, from despair, from the illusion that knowing is the same as controlling. You met a man once who demanded to know when he would die. You said nothing. He raged. Isn't it your job to know? You looked at him and said, it is my job to listen. He left angry, returned months later, asked nothing, just sat. That night you said, the gods have been quiet. He smiled. Then I will rest. There is wisdom in not knowing. You've seen it. In those who accept the sign without demanding translation. In those who thank the silence as much as the speech. In those who understand that the gods do not speak in futures. They speak in nudges. They don't tell you what you will be. They ask you to pay attention to what you already are. You don't always need the signs to say something new. Often, they confirm what was already felt. A mother who knows her son is hiding pain. A leader who fears peace more than war. A farmer who senses the earth's exhaustion. You read the sign, speak the truth, and they nod. Not in surprise, in recognition, because sometimes your role is not to reveal, it is to affirm, to validate what already lived quietly inside them. You've come to understand. You don't carry answers. You carry resonance. You ring the bell. Others must listen to the echo. That is the most sacred part of your work. Not the prediction, but the reflection. Not the power, but the humility. Not the knowing, but the willingness to not pretend. In Babylon, they call you many things, but only one matters. Mushadu, the one who walks with the unseen, not the one who commands, not the one who declares, the one who walks, beside, between, with. So when they come, eyes full of questions, you say, I cannot tell you what will happen, but I can show you what the gods have shown me. And then you light the lamp, you open the book of signs, you invite the silence to speak, and you listen. Together, you were taught to speak only what the signs reveal, nothing more, nothing less. That is the rule. And you believed it, deeply, earnestly, with the conviction of someone who still thought every truth deserved a voice. But then came the day when the truth felt like a blade, and someone stood in front of you. Not as a client, not as a believer, not as a ruler, but as a person, wounded, hopeful. And you saw what the gods had written. And you said something else. The first time you lied, it was a whisper, barely more than a rearranging of tone, a change in metaphor. The signs were clear: loss, sharp, inevitable soon. But the mother who stood before you was holding her son's tunic in her hands, the way one holds something that might disappear if released. He had gone to war. She had dreamed of black birds on a red sky. The reading said what she feared. But you said, the journey is hard, but his fire burns. You didn't lie completely. You didn't promise life, but you also didn't confirm death. And she left with lighter steps. That night, you didn't sleep. They don't prepare you for this. No tablet in the temple tells you what to do when truth becomes cruelty. No priest explains what silence costs. You learn alone. By watching, by choosing, by regretting, by repeating. You told yourself, at first, it was mercy, that the gods would understand. That truth, when unkind, can be softened like clay before it hardens. But mercy, when practiced often, becomes habit, and habits, in silence, grow roots. You once withheld a sign from the palace. A reading had shown division, deep, violent, a symbol in the gate that spoke of betrayal by blood. But the king was on edge, his counsel fragmented, his son too ambitious. The truth would have been like oil on flame. So you said, the signs advise caution, nothing more. And for a while, things held. Peace remained. The sun bided his time. No war erupted. But you wondered, every day, was it delay or denial? Did you protect or postpone destruction? Sometimes the lie is smaller. A dream misremembered on purpose. A word omitted from a vision, a sign misread in public, corrected only in private. And sometimes the lie is in silence, in the refusal to interpret at all. The gods are quiet today, you say, when in truth, they were screaming. The hardest lies are the ones you tell yourself. That your voice doesn't change when the signs speak of sorrow, that your hands don't tremble when the reading is too clear, that you can still see yourself in the mirror each morning. Sometimes you can. Sometimes the mirror is too clean, and the reflection too honest. You've seen other readers who lie without hesitation. They smile too easily. Their words come too fast. Their signs always seem convenient, and they are loved. Because comfort is seductive, certainty even more. They rise quickly, are consulted often, but Babylon watches, and the gods remember. Their names are not carved into temple walls, only into clay that dissolves in water. You fear becoming one of them, so you limit your lies. You choose them carefully. You carry them like stones in a satchel, each one a weight, but also a tool. You never lie for gain, only for protection. At least, that's what you tell yourself. But the line is thin, and the slope slippery. Because every time you soften a truth, it becomes easier to do it again. And eventually you must ask, am I protecting or controlling? Am I merciful or afraid? Am I a servant or a censor? You don't always know. One night, you dreamt of a tablet covered in unreadable signs. The symbols shifted as you looked at them, changed language, disappeared. You woke in a cold sweat and knew. Even the gods mistrust easy speech. There was a time you told the full truth. Every sign, every shadow, every omen without filter. And someone died. Not because of what you said, but because of how you said it. You told a man his son would not return. He believed you, so he drank poison. The son came back a week later. He had been delayed by a flood. The signs had been real, but your voice had made them irreversible. That day, you learned, truth can kill too. Now, when you read, you leave room for choice, for mystery, for survival. You say, there is danger, but not certainty. There is movement, but the destination is still shaped by will. There is darkness, but the stars have not yet chosen their path. And sometimes that's a lie, but it's one that holds the door open, instead of slamming it shut. You do not lie, often, but you lie enough to remember each one. They visit you at night, not in dreams, in memories that feel altered, moments that echo differently when recalled, a gesture you made, a word you avoided, a phrase you chose for softness, not precision. Each one, a ripple. Each one, a burden. Still, you carry them. Because you must. Because Babylon needs readers who can weigh truth not just by accuracy, but by cost. Because the gods do not demand cruelty. They demand fidelity. And sometimes, fidelity to their will means shielding others from the full brightness of their light. Because even truth, unfiltered, can blind. So you light your lamp. You wash your hands. You speak the signs. And sometimes, you speak them gently. You bend them like branches in wind, not to deceive, to guide, not to twist, to soften. And then, when no one is listening, you write the full reading on a private tablet, place it on your shelf, look at it once, then turn away and whisper, "Let mercy be the final word." You are not old, not by the count of winters, but your body feels otherwise. Your back stiffens before the rain. Your fingers ache after long readings. Your breath shortens when you climb the ziggurat steps, which once felt as familiar as your own heartbeat. It is not illness, it is wear, use, the slow erosion that comes from carrying what most never see. Not just visions, but questions, fears, silences. You feel them all, and you hold them gently. But holding, even gently, takes its toll. Your eyes were once quick, sharp. You could spot the smallest crease on a liver, could see a misaligned star the moment it flickered into view, could read the twitch in someone's jaw and know the question before they asked. Now, your sight softens. You still see, yes, but the clarity has become something deeper, less sharp, more resonant. You no longer read the mark, you feel it, but the cost is constant. Your eyes ache, your temples pulse. You rub your brow more often than you used to. And the dreams, they come heavier now. When you sleep, you do not rest. You float, half in the world, half in the symbols. You dream of rooms without doors, of livers that melt in your hands, of stars that fall and land silently in bowls of water. You wake not with fear, but with weight, as if you've carried something across sleep, and now it refuses to be put down. The solitude, too, grows louder with time. When you were younger, it was sacred, a choice, a devotion. Now it presses. Days pass when no one calls for a reading, and instead of peace, you feel a kind of drifting, as if your purpose is tied not to the gods, but to their echoes through others. And when those echoes fall silent, so do you. You walk through the temple and hear laughter from younger readers, their voices bright, their steps quick. They speak of signs like puzzles to solve, and you remember when you spoke that way. You do not envy them, but you do remember, with something like longing, not for youth, but for freshness, for the days when each sign felt like a discovery, not a reminder. Your hands have become slower, steadier, but also more tired. You clean the tools yourself still, out of respect, not necessity. You polish the bowl, fold the linen, pour the water, and feel the ache in your shoulders grow with each movement. Not unbearable, just present. Like a companion you never invited, but who never leaves. The body responds to years of seeing, of listening, of holding silence like a bowl filled too high. You forget meals, then overeat without noticing. You forget names. Then remember dreams from decades past in perfect detail. Your mind is full, but unruly. It does not file things away as it once did. Your hearing sharpens where your vision fades. You hear the tone behind the question, the breath between the words, the hesitation, the buried meaning. You hear the rustle of robes that come too early for a visit. You hear the absence of footsteps you expected. You hear when someone is about to lie or beg. You try to rest more, but rest is not always kind. The mind, untethered, wanders back to readings that went wrong, to signs misread, to the face of a queen who died after you said she'd rise, to the child who stopped dreaming after your warning, to the signs that came too late, to the ones that came, but you ignored, not out of neglect, out of exhaustion. You speak less now, not because you know less, because you know when words do not help. You have learned the value of pause, of eye contact, of the silence that invites the question to finish forming before you answer. People treat you differently, some with reverence, some with fear, some with pity. They see the grey in your beard, the lines in your brow. They think, this is a man who has seen too much, and they're right, but not in the way they think. You haven't seen armies fall or cities rise. You've seen the tiny shifts, the heartbreaks that never make tablets. The moments when someone's fate changes, not in war, but in a word. You've seen tremor more than quake, and that, in the end, leaves deeper marks. There are days when you consider leaving, letting someone younger take your place, letting the stars rise without your eyes tracking them, letting the dreams pass unanswered. But then, someone knocks. Someone comes with a dream they can't forget, with a sign they don't understand, with a fear they cannot name. And you, tired, older, slower, you listen, and you answer, not quickly, not clearly, but honestly. And they exhale, and you remember, this too is rest, not for the body, but for the soul. You do not fear aging, you fear dullness, of sign, of sense, of spirit. But so far, the signs still come. They still stir, still ask for you by name. And so, you stay. In your dreams now, you often see your younger self, watching you, not judging, just watching. You do not speak, neither does he. But when you wake, you feel seen. And that, in your solitude, is enough. Your bones will ache, your steps will slow, but the work remains. Because this work, this quiet art of listening between the lines, does not end when the body tires. It ends only when the signs fall silent. And so far, they haven't. It begins, not with a ceremony, not with a command, but with a question. A soft one, curious, hesitant. Why did the goat's liver turn like that today? You look up. The voice is small. Young, but not weak. A novice, one of the many assigned to sweep the temple stones, to arrange the scrolls, to grind the incense. You've seen this boy before, the one who lingers, watches when others leave, stares too long at the stars. And now, he's asking, not because he wants to impress, because he needs to understand. You pause, and you answer, because the gods leaned in. And just like that, the path begins. You didn't plan to teach. You never said aloud, it is time. But the signs don't always appear in the sky. Sometimes they appear in people, in the way they sit, listen, in the way they notice what others ignore. And when they appear, you answer. Because it is not yours to keep. It never was. You remember your own teacher. The way his eyes never blinked when reading. The way his silence held more weight than anyone's voice. He never told you you were ready. He handed you the stylus and said, "Start." And now, you hear your own voice doing the same. At first, it's small things. You ask the boy to record a dream, to watch the birds with you at sunrise, to clean the tools, not quickly, but deliberately. You teach him the names of the parts of the liver, not as organs, but as messages. The cup, the path, the gate, the notch, each with a memory, each with a weight. He listens. He remembers. He begins to see. Teaching is not instruction. It is transmission. You do not teach only knowledge. You teach presence, stillness. You teach how to wake without words and sit with the dream in silence. You teach how to hold a broken sign without fear. You teach when to speak, when not to, and hardest of all, when to say, "I don't know." The boy makes mistakes. Of course. He reads confidence where there is hesitation. He sees favor in a torn gate. He tries to be clear where the gods have only whispered. And you let him. Then correct, gently, because he must stumble. But he must not fall alone. One morning, he wakes you before dawn. His eyes are wide. "I saw a sign," he says. You nod, rise, sit with him. He describes a dream, a woman in blue, her mouth full of sand, a crow that speaks in riddles, a house that floats. He waits for you to explain, but you don't. Instead you ask, "How did it feel?" He pauses, like warning, but not fear. You smile. Then write that. Because before he can interpret, he must receive. You show him the tablets, the oldest ones. You explain the difference between history and pattern, between symbol and metaphor. You tell him the signs are not fixed, that what meant war a century ago may mean peace now, because the gods shift, the world shifts, and the reader must shift too, without losing anchor. He asks difficult questions. Have you ever lied? Have you ever ignored a sign? Have you ever failed someone? You answer honestly, yes, 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 because the signs may be divine, but you are not. And if he is to inherit your path, he must inherit your scars too, not to repeat them, but to understand them. He watches you closely, the way you hold the liver, the way you wait before speaking, the way you say perhaps instead of always. And slowly, his body changes, his posture stills, his voice lowers, his silences lengthen. He is becoming. Then comes the day you don't answer a knock at your door. You gesture to him. He opens it. A woman is there, worried, a dream of snakes and fire. He listens. You watch. He does not rush, does not promise. He says, "There is movement, but also protection." The woman exhales, leaves. You say nothing, but your chest feels lighter. Later you walk together. He asks, "How will I know when I'm ready?" You stop, look at the stars, say, "When you no longer need to ask." He doesn't speak, just stands beside you, listening, not to you, to the silence, to the signs. You begin letting him read more often. You step back, not far, just enough. You let him sit first, speak first, write first. And when he asks, you answer. But when he doesn't, you let the moment pass. Because the teacher must become background. So the voice that rises is his. One night, he brings you a dream. He says, "I think it's not mine." You nod. You're beginning to carry others. He doesn't know what to do with that. You say, "Just carry, don't fix." You tell him what your teacher told you. You are not a god, you are a gate. You do not speak truth. You invite it. You do not own the signs. You serve them. He writes this down, then closes the tablet, and breathes. Years pass. He grows taller, quieter. He begins to be called, even when you are not. The temple scribes start nodding at him the way they once nodded at you. People whisper his name when they speak of dreams, and one day, someone calls him adivinho. You hear it, he hears it. Neither of you flinch, because it's true now. Not fully, but enough. You are not done, but you are lighter, because the flame is not out. It's past, and it burns in steadier hands. He thanks you, often, but once he says, "You didn't teach me how to read, you taught me how to wait." You nod, because that is the secret. Not vision, not memory, not even knowledge, but patience. Patience enough to hear what others overlook, to hold what others rush past, to stay. And when your hands grow too slow, your eyes too dim, he will be there, at your side, with silence and a question. Will you walk with me? And you will say, only as far as the gate. And then you'll let him go, and Babylon will still be red. The city sleeps, shutters drawn, fires dimmed. The marketplace silent, save for the occasional rattle of pottery swaying gently in the wind. Children wrapped in linens, their breath steady. Dogs curled near doorways. Even the temple, in its vast stone gravity, exhales. But you are awake, always it seems. The last to sleep, the first to wake. Because the signs don't sleep, and neither, truly, do you. You tried once, to rest like others, to close your eyes and leave the weight behind. But even in your sleep, you felt it, the pull, the sense that something might shift while your eyes are closed. A sign might pass unrecorded. A dream might come, only to find no listener. And so, over time, you gave in. Sleep comes only when it must. Briefly. And never before you've checked the stars. Your nights begin late. You walk the temple halls with a lamp in hand. The walls breathe stories, dreams left behind, prayers etched in low stone, oil stains marking years of vigil. You pause at the observatory, look skyward. The constellations are familiar friends. You know their stories, their warnings, their long silences. You read them not as a poet reads beauty, but as a soldier reads signs of war. Every blink matters. Every delay holds meaning. There are tools you consult. A basin of water that reflects not the sky, but what waits behind it. A clay tablet from a dream 4 years past, still unresolved. A piece of linen tied 7 times, each knot a question unanswered. These are not relics, they are companions. And you return to them, again and again, in the hours when no one else is watching. The night is quiet, but never empty. You hear the flick of the oil in the lamps, the settling of old stone, the soft scrape of a rat near the granary. You even hear your own thoughts, like a second voice, quieter, deeper, older. It asks things no one else dares to. What if the gods change their minds? What if the signs lie? What if the silence is not patience, but absence? You do not answer. You just keep walking. People think you sit in trance, waiting for visions. They're wrong. You sweep. You arrange tablets. You clean the knife with ritual precision. You check the wick on the star lamp. Because vigilance is not poetry. It is rhythm, repetition, attention without glamour. You are there when the clouds part at midnight, when a single star flares unnaturally, then disappears. You are there when a novice has a nightmare and wanders into the courtyard, shivering. You do not speak. You only nod. Offer a cup of warm barley water. Sit beside them until the tremble fades. Then return to your post. There's a chair in your chamber. Plain wood. No cushion. You sit on it before dawn. Back straight. Eyes half closed. This is your deepest moment of the day. Not prayer. Not trance. Stillness. A listening so profound it feels like forgetting. You forget your name, your age, your duties. You become only presence, only ear. And if something needs to speak, now in this last hour before light, it does. Sometimes the gods wait until this moment, not because they are cruel, because only then are you quiet enough to hear. And then, slowly, the city returns. You hear the chickens first, then the creak of carts being pulled from stalls, then water being drawn, footsteps, voices, life, and you rise, not to greet the day, but to offer it. Your first task, recording. Everything seen, everything felt, everything not understood, but worth remembering, because the day forgets. And the city depends on someone who does not. People think you sleep during the day. You don't. You rest sometimes. But true sleep? Rare. You walk among the living like a candle burning from both ends. Not in pain, just slowly. You doze in chairs, never beds. Eat standing. Dream with eyes open. And always, always, return to the silence before nightfall, because that's when the listening begins again. You've seen others try this life. They burn bright, then burn out. Because this vigil is not about strength, it's about endurance, not intensity, but presence. Day after day, night after night, listening when no one else can, when no one else will. Once, a child asked, "Don't you ever get lonely?" You said, "Not when I'm watching." Because watching is not absence. It is a kind of conversation. With the gods, with time, with the thin thread that runs through every dream and sign and symbol. And you? You are the knot at that thread's end. You are the final reader before the world slips into silence, and the first to welcome it back into meaning each morning. This is your fate, not to lead armies, not to sit beside kings, but to wait and see and speak when it matters most. You are the last to sleep, the first to rise, because while others dream, you keep the door open. They will not build a statue for you. They will not sing songs in your name. Your face will not be carved in the stone walls of the palace, nor etched in gold beside the names of kings. Because you are not a figure of conquest. You are not a hero of war. You are not even truly known. You were never meant to be. Your life was made of moments no one else saw, of readings done in dim light, of dreams recorded in silence, of warnings softened into riddles, of truths never spoken aloud. And when the end comes, it does so the way your life did, quietly, without trumpet, without fear. Your apprentice will find you, not on the floor, not in the bed, on the small wooden chair, back straight, eyes closed, tablet in hand, as if waiting for the last sign that never came, or did, but needed no interpretation, because it was not a symbol, it was a rival. He will not weep, not then. He will cover you with the ceremonial cloth. He will light the incense. He will place your stylus on your chest. And then he will sit in silence as you taught him, waiting, listening, letting the ending echo. The others will come, temple scribes, novices, even some from the palace, not many, just enough, a quiet procession. They will not know what to say. They will not pretend to understand what you meant to the gods or to the world. But they will know this. Something vital has gone still. Your tablets will remain, some complete, some half-finished, some with only a single symbol drawn in haste, a final thought the gods whispered just before your last breath. No one will know what it meant. Not exactly, but perhaps that is fitting. You once said, "The best signs are not meant to be solved, only felt." And in your death, you leave behind a feeling, not glory, not legend, a presence, a calm, a silence that doesn't frighten, but invites. Your name will fade, clay erodes, voices forget, but the way you listened, the way you paused before speaking, The way you held uncertainty without fear? That remains. In the boy who became your heir, in the girl who will one day become his, in the echo of your footsteps through the halls, in the way someone stops years from now and looks at the stars and chooses not to rush the answer because they remember that someone once said, "Let's listen a little longer." Your death is not tragedy, it is release. You've carried so much, for so long. The signs, the dreams, the fears of others. Now, you let them go. Back into the wind, back into the silence, back into the place from which they came. And the gods, they do not greet you with fanfare. They do not kneel. They do not speak. They simply look. And you understand that they too were listening, all along. In the temple, your apprentice will one day tell a story. There was a man who once read the future but spoke softly. And that will be enough. No need for titles, no need for marble, just the whisper, the memory, the knowing that someone once held the thread between heaven and earth and never let it drop. You are gone, but the signs remain. The stars continue to move. The dreams still visit. The birds still fly strangely from time to time. And someone will be watching, listening, interpreting, not you, but shaped by you. And the gods? They are still whispering, still waiting, and the world still needs readers. So ends your journey, not with a bang, but with a breath, not with a monument, but with a moment, a space, a silence. And that silence, it echoes, because though no one will ever know everything you saw, they will feel what you left behind. And that is enough.